Hey guys, this is Tara Lee, and we're getting ready to go live. Chris Trump's up next. We're speaking here. We're checking in from Vancouver, BC. And I'm just going to do this run. It looks like the room's all getting ready to settle down, and I'll let you guys all get a seat and check this out. It should be good. Thanks for tuning in. And don't forget to share, guys, because I can't share on this phone. And don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button if you want to see more lives today.
Hey everybody, come on and grab a seat. We're going to start up real quick. Well, hey guys, thanks for getting up early. Most of us stayed up pretty late and took pretty hard. I know we took for like 2 hours right here last night. It was crazy. Just like street bums smoking lots of weed. Woo! But yeah, you guys, most of you guys probably know and heard of Chris Trump. I've got to know him, all these guys really in the last year, but I got to go out this summer and spend a little time in Boise with his class. And it was, you can turn me down, I'll get in there closer. I don't like the echo. It was amazing. Like, Chris is an amazing teacher that teaches from his heart, and he got after it. You know, you don't get to the level of education and learning art without like the drive. And then like just to hear your heart and the way he teaches and the way he comes at it. He's such a humble, caring man. And so I'm just really impressed with that. I just wanted to like honor you and thank you for how you bring it. So.
Woo!
Thanks, Josh. Super cool to hang out this summer. We had fun. We got nitty gritty. It's good. Josh is a pretty cool dude too. And yeah, but this, I'll say this again, but this natural farming, my journey, it's not, I think all of this, probably most of what we heard so far, it's not like anybody has some really radical invention they came up with, as much as we look into the science of regenerative agriculture. We're basically trying to find the playbook of how this already works. Like, if we're doing really well, it's because we got a glimpse at how this incredible symphony's being played. So I'm not going to tell you today anything that's like, I came up with a really good idea and we've hacked nature. And it's like, no, nature's pretty incredible. And if we are in line with its laws and how it functions, we just benefit from the engine that's already full speed down the road. And so yeah, so I'm not going to tell you anything that's like Chris Trump came up with. I'm just going to, hopefully, we'll talk a little bit about why it can work, that you can farm at a low cost with incredibly high production and profitability by coming in line with what nature's already doing and benefiting from them. So, yeah, if you don't know me, I'm son of a farmer, grew up on a farm in Hawaii. 2 years ago, I moved to Boise, Idaho to do some farming, and when I landed, I was hanging out with refugees and inviting them to come farm with us, and fun, really big change, and I was still involved with our farm going back a couple times a year, but I trained a crew there. They run kind of our nutrition program now with periodic phone calls, etc., but they're doing a really good job, so it's cool to make it. Yeah, that was kind of a 9-year journey for me to change our farm, but then to be able to leave and it still function really well was also kind of like a win in my journey. But we started, it's a 700-acre macadamia nut farm, and when I learned about this, it was very much in Korean. Korean natural farming isn't a new thing. It's just in America, when we told great grandpa, I don't want your knowledge anymore, this guy's gonna sell me really good stuff. I don't need that traditional knowledge passed down, and we lost all of that. In Japan and Korea, they didn't. There was kind of a continuation of 100 years of kind of this. We do this because it works, and yeah. So went on a journey. They do it in wheelbarrow size batches in Korea because they have 1-acre farms owned by one family. And so the hard part for me when I started was like, okay, 700 acres, one wheelbarrow at a time. The next 20 years I'll cover it once. And so I had to scale and learn the ins and outs and the difficulties that come with scaling. But right now we farm 700 acres using only Korean natural farming in conjunction with good composting methods, and we use all our byproducts and waste from our farm, and we bring in almost nothing. We bring in some fish bone meal periodically for composting, but we are farming, in our industry, we're about 25% higher production per acre than any of our peers. They're all conventional farmers. We make up 1/3 of the organic acreage in the state of Hawaii on our farm. That just means that there's not a lot of organic agriculture, not that big. We had our diseases remediated by changing the way we farm, and we're doing better than we ever have on a profit scale in profitability, without compromising paying high wages to our employees and giving good benefits. We didn't mess with that to gain profitability. We farmed better, partnering with nature. So we're not going backwards anytime soon. This is a really legitimate and real way for us to be a conscious and kind of profitable farm where we farm. And as far as cost to farm, Hawaii is probably going to remain one of the highest places cost-wise to farm. Anything you might want to buy, a tractor, equipment, it's all, you're paying the tax of the barge. So everything's higher in cost, and yet it works. So reducing inputs, not buying fertilizer coming over from the mainland, is a big deal. So I'm gonna start out with a kind of science overview of why and a little bit of the how of what we're trying to accomplish in natural farming, because I recognize some people are pretty deep down that rabbit hole and other people are like, yeah, I heard about it or I watched the video. So I'm gonna kind of do a little thing by way of introduction. The idea, and pretty much what everybody's talking about, why this conference is here, is the plant above ground. What you're seeing is representative of what you're not seeing, what's below the soil surface. And what the problems we can run into is trying to fix what's above ground while ignoring the microbial life and the life in general of your roots and etc. So we farm currently, and in natural farming, you're thinking of as much as you're growing a plant, you're ranching microbes, so to speak. You're tending to a herd of microscopic coworkers, so that's basic concept. So the research we need is that as the world turns its eye to microbial life, is microbial research and agroecosystem management. So not just what are microbes and what do they do, because that will never, it'll be a long journey to affect your bottom line. You'll have to translate why that microbe doing that is so important. But if we can get research in the category of agroecosystem management, basically, okay, take your funding, and instead of finding that one detail, finding a broader, how do I manage my farm in light of microbes? And so that's kind of what I end up doing. So this is, we got a microscope early on in this when I realized that I couldn't trust other people to tell me what they were giving me. I did a trial once where I bought something somebody made, and they said it was really good, and it was just bacteria, and I farmed trees, and trees like a 30 to 1 to 100 to 1 bacterial, fungal bacterial ratio or more, and I put 20 tons of this material on that was all bacteria. My trees turned yellow almost overnight. And it wasn't because I put a toxic chemical down, it was because my trees like a certain balance, and I dropped imbalance on them. And so that was back in 2011, and I was like, or 2010, and I was like, I need a microscope. I can't trust them. I need to know what's going on. And Elaine actually came in 2010, I believe, Ingham, and taught me how to use a microscope. And so I benefited from that for the last 8 years. It's been sweet. So sorry, go back one. So this is a fruiting This is a fruiting body of large hyphodiameter fungi. And so what we're constantly doing as we're making IMO is we're causing fungal to bloom in a aerobic surface and turning it into a center that's hot and not ideal conditions for fungi. And so I'm constantly seeing sporulation and then blooming. So what I end up with is an incredibly dense mass of seeds, spores. So in the end, what I'm putting on is like a Johnny seed packet of fungal diversity. That's really what I'm doing. Bacteria is so easy to do in everything we're doing in natural farming. Yeast is also pretty easy to multiply, but more like fungi. And what we need to focus on, or tend to, because they're a little more finicky, is our multiplication of our fungal life. So, yeah, go ahead. So these are a few studies where they're actually looking at that. In plant root zones, the microbiota mobilizes and provides nutrients by increasing nutrient bioavailability from soil. We know this, you guys are here for that reason. But these are known things, and yet there's not a whole lot known about it. And so we're wanting to increase. Non-nutritional functions increase the host tolerance to biotic disease, soil-borne pathogens. The root microbiota can also affect plant fitness, but in fact, flower plasticity. And so those are a few of the studies you can dig into to, if somebody's asking you for empirical evidence of why this works. Go ahead. So this is a little bit of why, kind of an example that I find works for me. So one of the areas where we're studying microbial diversity more, or we're a little farther ahead than in soil, is in the human gut, human biome. There's a lot of, problems that arise, and so you have trillions of microbes in your body, and they contribute to how you get your energy from food. We understand that. Changes to your gut biome can directly affect your health and ability to take up nutrients. Plants are the same. So we have all these diseases that happen when human biome gets affected. Basically, our gut gets affected, and we think that plants can survive on food alone, that they don't need the microbial life. But just like us, plants don't have a transport method without microbial life. A plant can't live in a vacuum of microbes, neither can we. We take all the microbial life out of our gut, we die. And so, go ahead. So, fecal microbiota transplant. This is for those that don't understand what it is we're trying to do with natural farming. In nutrition and medical science for human beings, this is a widely accepted and studied practice. The funny thing about this, so it's when if somebody's like had an event and they're basically dying because they can't take up nutrients from their food, they will take some feces from the gut of a healthy person and put it in a pill or implant it into the gut of the suffering person, and all of a sudden the suffering person or the sick person becomes healthy. Those microbes transfer. Weird stuff. I actually met the guy in China in October. I was speaking at a conference, and I met the guy who invented this. He's like, I can't believe you talked about this. And I've never heard anybody talk about this. And he was pretty excited. He's pretty nerdy too. So the cool thing about this, go ahead, is, being back one, we don't understand why it works, per se. So we have this medical practice that's widely used on human beings, and we have this tiny understanding of why, the complex interactions of all these microbes. That's why we're just taking what's in you and putting it in him or her, because we don't actually have the tech to get that diversity, figure out the ratios, and make some pill that you can just buy. If they could do that, you better believe they would patent it and sell it to the people that are having trouble. But this is complex. These interactions of diversity and which varieties we're not quite there yet in understanding exactly how to make that cocktail. That's okay. We need to embrace that ignorance. Especially, and in soil, in natural farming, that's what we're doing. We're embracing the fact, you know what, there's enough going on in the interconnections of natural diversity that I don't really get it all as a farmer. And I'm okay with that. I just need to use it. So they're saying, I don't need to understand why that person, all the details of why that person's gut's healthy. I'm okay doing a medical procedure to put it in this unhealthy person because it works. This person's dying, they need something, we're gonna do what works even if we don't totally understand it. Does that make sense? Okay. So that's all to explain what we're doing in natural farming. This is basically like a soil FMT, a soil fecal microbiota transplant. If humans inside of our intestines is the gut of a human being, then the soil around the root zone, the soil in the area is the gut of the plant. And so we're taking the microbial life of a healthy, thriving forest or ecosystem and transplanting it or putting it in maybe my highly impacted or not diverse microbial system in my grow land or my grow bed or my soil outdoors. Does that make sense? So this is the whole indigenous microorganism. So we're going out into the forest, we're collecting high diverse and functioning soil ecosystems, and we don't care that we know every single microbe in that process. We just want to effectively, and with as little adulteration as possible, transfer it into my farmland so that it functions in its whole community as it was functioning in nature. Does that make sense? All right, go ahead. So we did look at this with MIT. Hopefully that study will be, I'll be able to share it next time we talk or online. We have about half of the research. What I've learned about PhDs from MIT is they're humans too. And so our multi-PhD soil doctor had life crisis and life happened. So what we found is so far we have a cool view of how some of it transferred and a small write-up, but I just wrote a terse email actually yesterday while listening to our friends speak, like, okay guys, this can't go on. But it's really fun. What we looked at is how effectively are we transferring from soil diversity to IMO4. How well has that diversity transferred? So hopefully we'll have that very soon. Go ahead. And so we sent away from Hawaii a bunch of samples. They put it in cryo-freeze in MIT, and they have labs that can handle playing with fungi, which I found out is something you need a pretty expensive lab for to do all kosher. Go ahead. So cannabis is like far more like a tree than a lettuce in its preferences in fungal bacterial ratio and preference. You've heard this all week. I won't spend, or yesterday I won't spend much time, but for trees, we're in the same category. We like a high fungal to bacterial ratio that takes a little care in what we're making. And so I just encourage you, not because you've entered into wanting to do things with natural farming, doesn't mean that you're doing it right. And that's a little caution that this really is about having balanced finished product. If you just make bacteria, you can, bokashi or EM, these are products, basically bacterial products. In natural farming, we're not trying to do it's really easy to do just bacteria. What we're doing is we want to hone the skills and the understanding to be able to make a balanced product for your crop. So for cannabis, you're probably in the category of 25 to 1 or 30 to 1 as far as fungal to bacterial ratio preference. And that's a simple soil test, costs about $100 to find kind of where you're standing in that type of diversity. So yeah, and that, as our friend was talking earlier, that really matters in how well your plant's going to be able to deal with disease and take up nutrients. Like my example of putting on bacteria, my trees yellowing. There was nothing wrong with the soil. There's nothing wrong with their nutrients. They were yellowing. That 5-acre trial was yellowing just because of the imbalance of the fungal bacterial ratio. So if you get nothing else, really this weekend, coming to understand what fungal to bacterial ratio is and how to properly employ that principle in your soil can make a huge difference on everything you're doing. It'll take a little going down the rabbit hole and figuring out what you're actually accomplishing, but it might be the single most important thing for you to do. So aiming at a 25 to 1 approximately in your soil for your crop is a big deal. So this is soil test, like I was explaining. This is about $100. This is from Earth Fort, who Elaine's recommended before. And this is, interpretation is a big deal, knowing what you're looking at, but this, some of the things I'm looking for is hypodiameter, total fungi, total bacteria, and so the total fungi to total bacteria ratio, I have to have some degree higher in fungal to bacterial. Does it have to be 30 to 1 in my samples every time for me to apply it? No, not necessarily, but I need to have a fungal inoculum for trees. For you guys, I would say you have to. You don't want to be just putting on bacteria all the time. You'll have deficiencies that have nothing to do with what kind of nutrients you have. You'll have deficiencies just because of a decreased ability to take up nutrients because they're not able to form the right relationships. Does that make sense? So this is a 5 to 1, or 5 to 1 fungal to bacterial ratio. This is kind of a mature product. All right, you can go to the next one. Oh yeah, I could have done that. Go ahead. One more. And one more. And one more. So again, same thing. This is a 7 to 1. So you're, yeah, it's an easy test. This, you don't have to know how to do a microscope and assess your own work. You can look at this and have a sense of, it's like your grade in your report card. And so again, I'm going for fungal, hypodiameter, disease suppressive fungi present. It's an easy way for you to come to kind of wrap your head around what you're doing on your farm and how effective it is. I would strongly encourage, just dig into this a little bit, this concept of fungal bacterial ratio. Go ahead. So what is Korean natural farming? Commercially scalable and viable. I do this exclusively on 700 acres and it's profitable. The idea that you can gain knowledge, I think Joshua would say he has knowledge that he can use for a lifetime, and he got a lot of it in about a week. So the idea that you can gain knowledge to create nutrients that isn't a big out-of-pocket expense. We farm macadamia nuts for $27 per acre per year for our inputs, our nutrients. This, everything we buy, all the manpower paid at wages, workman's comp, insurance to make it, and all the equipment to apply it. $27 per acre per year. So this is an empowering of you to create something that feeds plants in an effective way. And it's based on, by and large, what is science? Science is the observation of nature through experiment, or the study of nature through experimentation and observation. Do you have to have a PhD to do an experiment? No. Does it matter how you set up what you're doing, that you have some basic things in place so you're not just coming up with what you think is cool? Yeah, you're gonna have to learn, like, okay, I need to be a little bit removed from the results. I need to just take the results for what they are. But an important thing is moving towards really being able to observe your plants. And you guys, probably as an industry, are some of the best with that. So I'm preaching to the choir, but it's important to come to learn what my plant needs and how to best affect that. So this is a picture of basically an auger for fungi. Why do we use rice? Rice is a grain with the highest fat content basically in nature. What is fungi like? Well, people say fungi like lignans, and what is in a lignan? What's in there? What are the fungi doing? Well, there's amino acid chains, there's fatty acids. Fungi like to break apart that chain, use the energy, and process the lipids, the fats. And so the fats in rice work for inviting them to do a little bloom for us to have a farmer-made inoculum. I don't have to buy anything from the store. I can use something from my area that likes my rainfall, my temperature, my barometric pressure, has thrived in that zone for thousands of years, and I can reapply it. Now I don't have to worry about the 6-month fall off that something, grown in a lab might have. I'm going to benefit from the reality that this actually already likes my home farm and will self-perpetuate year after year. I'm actually going to experiment with 120 acres with no inputs. It's not ideal. Commercial land needs some nitrogen input, but we're getting yields with homeopathic amounts of nitrogen compared to what our industry expects that you need to get the yields we're getting. And I just would love to say, yeah, drive through this, because people come visit now. Initially they're like, you guys are crazy. But now we're like 7 years into doing this, and they come visit and they're like, so what are you doing? They don't really want to know, they're just kind of like testing the water. So the trees look really good, and we tell them how much nitrogen or fertilizing we use on that orchard, and they're like, wow. They think we're crazy, but they're also like, we're making more money than them. So now they're kind of like, I should probably try and figure out what you're doing, but it sounds too weird. All right, go ahead. This is a study paid for, I think, by somebody that owns some part of EM. Was done by University of Hawaii Manoa, Dr. Kunhui Wang, and evaluating microbes for field application. I'm going to clip through this pretty quick because I want to get to some things that are going to be practical for you. Go ahead. The purpose of this was to take a bunch of products and compare them in a field trial with crops. And so the nitty-gritty is they had 4 or 5 things with anywhere from 100% conventional fertilizers to 50% conventional fertilizers compared against IMO, just IMO and some foliar nutrients, which I'll explain the foliar nutrients at the end. So IMO, a significant point, IMO is the only one of these applications that didn't have at least 50%, or I think there is a 25% fertilizer. Yeah, evaluating microbes using 25 and 50% of standard fertilizer rates and 100% of... So as we look at these results, no, the IMO version had no fertilizer other than a light homeopathic amount of foliar feed. Go ahead. So standard grower practice is a weekly horticultural micronutrient mixture plus 100% fertilizers. There's a no treatment whatsoever, just a control. IMO just in the front end, and then a weekly foliar. EM50 standard fertilizers at 50% plus EM1. Suma 50 is standard fertilizers at 50% plus a Suma Grow, which is another product. Mycos 50% with another product, and then 25% with Suma Grow and Mycos. Go ahead. Sorry. So plant height in corn, IMO and the Mycos 50 are the 2 at the top. IMO is the highest in plant height. Go ahead. 5 weeks after planting. Total fruit weight at the end, IMO is the highest. EM50, 50% fertilizer plus a standard grower practice are the 3 red lines. Go ahead. Total plant biomass, the standard grower practice was a little bit higher in the 100% fertilizer than IMO, and then we have Mycos and Sumago over here. Go ahead. So their conclusions for the study, fruit weight, IMO, and EM50 were the top performers, produced comparable yields as a standard grower practice. Biomass, Sumagrow, IMO, and Mycos were all comparable. All right, go ahead. Total fruit, IMO, EM. Anyway, so all inoculated treatments increased nematode richness. Kunhui is a nematologist. I'm not saying that right.
No, that is correct.
That is correct, yeah, she's a nematode doctor. And yeah, you can go to the next one. Conclusions, additional tests need to be done. Obviously, this is a one-off, but it was noteworthy, she says, that microorganism treatments did comparably well with only 1-2 applications up front versus the standard practice, which included 100% conventional fertilizer and a weekly micronutrient spray. Anybody basically doing that same transition from conventional practice with weekly micronutrient spray to now trying to deal with just microbial life? Is that some of you guys experience the same thing? Okay, go ahead. So this is us spraying in our farm, and we have 100% of those kind of methods that we described, and our costs are comparable really to a conventional practice. We have to mow now. So standard grower practice in our industry is to torch all the orchard floors. So from here to here, they use Roundup, and it's bare earth all the time. And we have to mow. So it's an increased cost with mowing, but we're reducing our costs elsewhere. Go ahead. This is one of the Japanese dudes that perpetuated some of these natural farming thoughts when the world started changing. And he said, the ultimate goal of farming is not the growing of crops, but the cultivation and perfection of human beings. So this, as much as you have a goal to be better farmers and be more profitable, know that there's something along this journey that's really about us. It's about us being affected by what we're doing and being able to enjoy what we're doing. So this was a brief touch at research, and by no means thoroughly conclusive, but a lot of fun research is coming in the next 10 years, in the next generation, as we look at how this happens. We won't be the strange, weird, sideline people. I talked to a dude that runs a lab in San Diego, and this is about 5-7 years ago. It's a massive multi-million-dollar lab, and he said 100% of his staff and lab was paid for at that time by Monsanto's research to study how microbes make fertilizer, basically. And so this is something everybody wants to know. And I'm hoping that it's a little too complicated for them to patent. And really, we don't have to, what I was saying in the beginning, we don't have to fully understand every detail and interconnection that happens in the soil to benefit from it. We can simply do what nature's, we can take, I'll answer your question, what nature's doing, transfer it, and benefit from it, and we can just say, this is great. I'm enjoying the painting, though I don't know all the thoughts of the painter. You know, I can appreciate it and benefit from it. So I would love to be involved. If anybody's playing with research, I'd love to be involved and help with that. And so yeah, hit me up. But we'll jump into some practical things now, answer some questions. We can switch slides. Your question?
I was just going to say, I know you're all thinking about it in the back of your mind, but it's going to take a revolution to stop them from patenting everything you want to have and use.
Yeah.
So be ready for a fight and save up for some lawyers. Be ready to go to the capitals and call the Congress people, because Canada is an example, and we're all going to have to fight the genetic editing thing.
Don't worry anymore about GMO. Worry about GMMO, genetically modified microorganisms. If they could patent a microbe and then sue you for it being found in your lab or your land, you'd be bummed. But I am expecting and hoping that this is actually a frontier that has such a deep bottom that we're going to get into the land of head scratching when they try and start messing with things. Or it'll wipe out all Earth, all life as we know it, and the sea will turn to blood. And, yeah. Yeah.
Just kind of a comment there. If you make it public knowledge, if you discover something about how the bacteria works, and you don't want it to be patented, and if you publish it, you make it public knowledge, and it's in the sphere, then they can't patent it anymore.
Is a good point. And when we got this from Korea, as far as natural farming, because it was such a system and kind of looked patentable, we talked with each other and we're like, hey, let's just start putting this on YouTube right off. So before we start holding, there's classes or really becomes widely published in English, let's put it in the public forum so that later down the line, people can't say, I had this idea first. So yeah, we were literally at the first training of this in English coming from Korea. So, you know, and not that natural farming is it's a method. It's just an elegant package for tending the microbial life in the soil. This stuff that we're now looking at with a microscope, farmers through observation and experimentation have been doing for thousands of years, right? Who better to be a scientist than a farmer who cares about the result, is constantly observing the process, and won't do something that doesn't work next year, and will do something that works the next year, right? If they have a bumper crop because they changed something, you better believe they're going to pass that knowledge on to their son, you know, or daughter. Whereas if they have a failure because they changed something, you better believe they're going to edit it out from that process. So we can look at what's been, yeah.
You really have to get that information published. You can't pass it on to your son or your daughter because it's still within the small family group. It's still something that you're keeping secret.
Right.
You
Well,
have to share that. So this is, you know, the idea that you got to go put it on the internet, go get it on YouTube, go, you know, the information.
And
That's why we published everything that we have. So,
and that's it. But that wasn't being done 3 generations ago. 3 generations ago, every farmer just passed down the knowledge.
kept it secret.
And, well, yeah, secret or just didn't care. They were focused on the cows needing to be milked, and they weren't writers. You know, they weren't into book writing or whatever. And so all of a sudden, our revolution of chemical fertilizer came in, and we're like, oh, I don't need Grandpa's knowledge anymore. I got this really good salesman that tells me he has everything I need. And we're now, me and you are 3 generations, 4 generations removed from knowledge that was passed down for thousands of years. And that's why we're having this meeting. That's why we need to re-attain this knowledge. And I'm just saying, the reason I brought up the farmer being a good scientist is these, as you see, oh wow, that's being done in this country or that country, and they never stopped doing that. They didn't know about microbes, but they were using these principles. And so what I'm saying is natural farming isn't the answer. It is a tool, like somebody was saying yesterday, it's a bunch of tools in your tool belt, an elegant one that I found was helpful for me to scale and farm the way we farm. So I was just bringing that, all the knowledge as it helps us open the playbook of how nature's already functioning is really helpful. All right, let's jump into this. All right, is this the first slide? Yeah. Okay. So this is a principle in natural farming, the principle of you and I are one. Basically, nature's funny in that we have a lot of these themes across the board. Humans have a seed form, adolescence or true leaves form in humans. This is a little guy whose true leaves have just come out or whatever. Humans have a reproductive state. They have a, consumption state, teenagers eat a lot, vegetative growth. They have, a person's getting pregnant, reproductive growth, a change, women want some sour food because they need that phosphorus, or, this is in baby making, have cravings. These are all changes that happen whether you're in the plant or animal kingdom. There's a theme. I'm not saying it's exactly the same, but this is kind of a principle we find in natural farming, that we can benefit from what we know a lot about, human process and the needs that change. And as we look towards plants, we can kind of benefit from having those concepts. So go ahead and tap. This is the slight change that happens. Those aren't the same kid, but you get the idea. He is eating in a different way than the infant. The infant needs things cut up real small, or milk at a young age. And so as I start talking about this, I'm going to talk about the right food at the right time and the right amount. Being able to help your bottom line and increase productivity without just dumping a bunch of stuff all the time. I don't feed my newborn infant steak. Why? Because at that stage of life, it doesn't need that kind of food. It needs milk. That's where it's at. And plants are the same. And my 80-year-old grandmother doesn't need my meal or my, a 16-year-old's meal. She's kind of mellowed out. She just needs her vitamins and, stuff like that. We have these stages of life. Plants are the same. And so if we think they need one food because I know their whole life they need a food, we're missing the finesse that is plants have stages where they need specific feeds. And that's really where you can save money and become a better farmer through observation in natural farming. All right, let's jump into it. All right, so these are pictures from my friend Wendy Kornberg. She lives in California. She took the class in the summer in natural farming, and there's a soil treatment solution or maintenance solution, also known as SES, which is a really simple nutrient mix, like extremely low in the food category, but still a good nutrient for plants. And it's used for seed soaking to help with germination. So she dropped her seeds in seed soak. She had 100% germination 10 hours later. She wasn't ready for it because she usually is expecting it to take a couple days. But it's a minor nutrient, and so this nutrient in natural farming is kind of the base nutrient. As I talk, I'm going to explain what makes it up, but it's the milk, it's the baby food. It costs nearly nothing, it's very cheap, and it's a small amount of nutrients in the beginning of a plant's life. You don't need to load them with your fertilizers right as they're starting. You don't need to have their soil dense with fertilizers right as they're starting. You can start light, just like milk for a baby. You don't want to feed them steak day one. Go ahead. All right, so another thing that we do in natural farming is we observe our plant and what it needs at its stage. Josh, what am I out of time?
You got 30 minutes.
Okay, cool. Just don't want to know how much I'm speaking or not. So these plants are telling us 3 different things, right? Through observation. We can look at, and you guys are already doing that. You're looking at, I have yellowing or I don't have yellowing. You're trying to assess that. In natural farming, we have a toolkit depending on what we're seeing, and it's foliar nutrients made through fermentation, very micronized and plant available, can be taken up through the leaves. So the idea is extremely available, not a bunch of nutrients that sit there and get taken up sometime later. I, as the farmer, can actually, with diligence and kind of conscientiousness, I can give the right amount of nutrients at the right time, and I can be trusted with that. Just like I can be trusted to not feed steak to my infant, I'm observing that. I know that. I'm not going to be surprised. I'm not going to be like tricked into giving steak to my infant, because we know humans, right? But we can get tricked into giving full-grown plants nutrients to a seedling, or a small plant, and that I'm proposing is maybe not the right course to take. So this plant is showing something, right? What is this showing? Just throw it out there. You don't have to be right. What is this plant telling you? A deficiency in what? Nitrogen. You have those powers of observation, right? You can look at that plant and that's say, man, that's a tomato plant. It needs a bunch of nitrogen, and that plant is telling me, by its appearance, by its how it's showing, that it wants some nitrogen. It just called me on the phone saying, hey, I'm hungry, right? If it was my 10-year-old. So I give it something. Okay, this plant, let's see. Oh yeah, this plant is telling me something. What is this plant telling me? It's a little harder. It's maybe you can't see it from back here. Think more growth stage than deficiency.
It's in a veg stage.
In a veg stage and what was that? Pre-flower? Yeah. You see a little at the top. It's starting to do a little pre-flowering, right? It's telling me it's now changing from a teenager, you know, a 10-year-old, 11-year-old to a, sorry, don't be offended by my, I'm going to use women because women are more easily to recognize they have reproductive capability, but to a 13, 14-year-old that can reproduce, right? So it's telling me I'm going through a growth change. I'm going through a stage change. I'm getting ready to make fruit. Does a plant need different food when it's changing? Yeah. So here, sorry, I didn't hear you.
It needs a steak.
Yeah. Sure. Or right now, probably it needs a little phosphorus. You know, it needs a little specific nutrient for that. So it needs a bunch of things, but I can know, you know, why does my wife want me to get her pickles when she's about, you know, she's pregnant? You know, something about that sour, you know, and so there's specific vitamins and minerals depending on, or minerals and nutrients depending on your crop that you're gonna want to put in. So we have tools for that, or we can do things with that. What is this plant telling me?
Too fat.
Too fat. What might I do if something's kind of over rich in nitrogen? I can apply some calcium. I could help balance easily taken up foliar application of calcium that it could absorb right away could help it deal with some of this and turn it into structure and growth, right? This is a little bit the variety of the tomato, but I also liked how it was pretty obvious. So go ahead and tap. So there's a type 3 or a reproductive growth that's more in the calcium category. Go ahead. Changeover, we have a specific nutrient we're spraying that's micronized and easily taken up. That would be for a plant just about to change into reproductive growth. Yeah.
Let's say you did want to do a foliar application of calcium. Would it be at that smaller homeopathic dose you were talking about?
Yeah, and you can do it weekly. You're not loading it with all the calcium it's going to need for the next month. Because all this, maybe it doesn't need what you're thinking it needs. Maybe it just needs a touch of it.
And foliar application because the uptake's immediate?
Yeah, you can do it. You can do it through fertigation or soil drench too. It works, but yeah. And then go ahead. And then this is a type 2 with nitrogen. That one has calcium. That one has some phosphorus. You can have, so what I'm going to start with is a really simple explanation of this, and then I'm going to talk about how you could add in all kinds of nutrients. But it's more to the idea that as an observant farmer, you can give your plant the right amount of nutrients at the right time. And all of a sudden, I'm using 2 cents of nutrients instead of $10 worth of nutrients. And, all right. So simplified recipes, that baby food we were talking about ends up being kind of the base for most of these recipes. So this is OHN, brown rice vinegar, and FPJ. So FPJ, think of FPJ as like a liquid compost, a highly available micronized plant food of liquid compost, fermentation. And then type 2 has our fertilizer in it, our high nitrogen FAA. So that's when that plant's down here showing me nitrogen deficiency, I can hit it with some of that. It responds immediately. We're talking an hour because of how available those nutrients are. Changeover, I bring in a phosphorus, a calcium phosphate. So that's when it's getting ready to flower. So a week before flowering is really the ideal time. And you can know that about your plant. Some of you can plan it because you're changing scenarios for your plant to make them flower. So a week before that, you would hit it with this nutrient. Type 3 has the calcium, and then liquid IMO is kind of like the microbial life version, and you can check out the recipe on YouTube. Right? Yeah, so that's kind of it on the practical. Now I'm going to re-explain that. Go back one slide, actually. So now in each one of these, so I have the base at the top. I have nitrogen. There's more you can do. Potassium is another thing that you can make micronized. But each one of these, we have here down below, type 2, changeover, and type 3. Oh, I'm sorry, they all say SES. This is wrong. I must have copied down. They're not all SES. I put their names in there. I don't know how that happened. Sorry.
What should it say?
It should say type 3 should say vegetative, or type 2 should say vegetative. XO should say changeover, and type 3 should say reproductive. So here's the thing. In a plant producing flower, does it go between needing nitrogen and needing calcium back and forth during that journey sometimes? Like, is it showing those deficiencies one week to another week? It is. So this isn't a hard and fast that one happens at vegetative and one happens at reproductive. I could have a plan to say that tomato plant, say it's kind of fat, and then it just starts going gangly and gangbusters and putting out all these things, and I want to slow down and work on fruit production. I can hit it now with phosphorus and nitrogen. I can hit it with a different suite of nutrients depending on where it is right now at this time. So every week I can be looking at this. So though this is kind of, I'm telling you, vegetative, changeover, reproductive, that's more to kind of help you think of observation. But really what you can do is you can take that brown rice vinegar, OHN, and FPJ, and add in maybe a 1 to 1,000 FAA, 1 to 2,000 WCAP, because it needs a little bit of that, 1 to 2,000 WCA. I know this is confusing, stay with me. So you can customize and use all these nutrients depending on it. You can have all of them in there, but maybe you know it needs a lot of calcium, so that one I'm going to use at a higher rate, or more calcium and a tiny bit of nitrogen, tiny bit of phosphorus, because of where it is. It's that 10-year-old that needs food, needs steak. It's that yellowing plant. So I can still give it the suite of nutrients, but I'm tailoring how much of everything based on specifically observing and understanding. I can actually know through observation what my plant needs. And so it's calling you to be a pretty observant farmer. It's calling you to, weekly be doing that. But this, once you kind of get a dial for it, you can say, I know what that plant needs, and feed it. You see it respond that next day, and you have that instant reward for your kind of observant farming. Now, I wouldn't just start messing around with all of this on all your plants at the same time while you learn. Because if you start giving it the wrong nutrients at the wrong time, because they're so available, you're actually sending signals to a plant. You're actually telling it to do things because of the availability. And so plants will kind of like pop, twitch, like Austin Powers when he danced, or the like the fembots to death or whatever. They just start like, does not compute, and you will get decreased production, not because you're not giving them nutrients, but because you're giving them the wrong nutrients at the wrong time. This is a pretty different thing we're talking about here. So I would encourage you to have, as you learn at a small scale with one plant. If you have a 30 plant grow, don't just go in and, I think this is a good idea, and spray everything all at once, because it really is pretty potent nutrients. It really does get taken up well. I'm not just saying that and trying to hit the rah-rah drum. So play around with this, learn to use these nutrients maybe on one plant. But cost-wise, we're using anything in FPJ at a rate of 1 to 500. So 1 ml in a liter is a very small amount of your nutrients having a pretty good impact. And even to make it in the first place is really inexpensive. So this is kind of the suite. I'll let you guys answer questions. I will be releasing a video next month that people are helping. I don't know how to make websites. People are helping me put stuff online. So next month on naturalharming.co, I will release a video kind of laying this out and taking you through the journey on how to, kind of like what I'm talking about here, but a little more in depth. That should help. But it's basically feel empowered to make your own nutrients, observe what you can obviously see, because you guys just did it not even knowing what I was talking about. You guys are already doing it with your crops, but be able to use nutrients at the right amount at the right time. So just is kind of the point, that the tools are in your hand, and they don't have to cost a ton of money. But all things also aren't the same. So just because you're like, I feel like I'm making FPJ, but you made up your own recipe, doesn't mean it's going to work the same as what we're talking about here. So I would encourage you, I made some videos that are simple on how to do it. Yeah, go ahead.
When you're making all of your things there, are you sourcing out fully organic things that haven't had any herbicide, pesticide spray, so that none of that stuff ends up in the original FPGA or et cetera?
It's a good question. I want to be careful how I answer it. No. So OHN has some alcohol in it, and we use it at a pretty small rate. If I tested non-organic alcohol, I might get a very small reading, depending on how they do it. But then in a ferment and used at that dilution rate, the reading is insignificant. And so I'm a farmer. I don't view that as a religion, in that I have to have it absolutely perfect. I want to make medicine, and sorry, I know this is going to be hard for people, but if you put yourself out of a job because you're paying so much for nutrients that are perfectly pure, that you can't afford to continue to do this, then what's the point? And that said, if you can afford to source organic everything and still have your bottom line make sense and do what you're doing, then I'd say go for it. Yeah.
Do you find that use residual pesticides?
No.
On the ferments? Or
No. But I don't use, for FPJ, I would never use a sprayed plant or something like that. Generally with FPJ, what we're doing is finding a wild plant. Something that literally is functioning, nobody's tending it, it's always green and healthy, there's an overabundance of it in your area. That plant has something, and is taking up nutrients in such a way that it's going to be nutrient dense, because it's capable of harvesting in its area. And so yeah, definitely don't want some conventional crop that's being grown on a farm. You want, but yeah, as far as like organic vodka, no. But that's my stance. I care a lot about my employees and them having a living wage, you know, or our farm making sense. The vodka isn't important, you know, in the scheme of all of that. But I don't knock somebody doing that. I just caution, don't be so expensive that you can't farm in your inputs. Yeah, was there a question? Yeah.
How do we know, like say if we make an FPJ or something, how do we know if we're making it to a standard that's acceptable to what you were doing?
So it's actually pretty simple, but there is a recipe. So you'll make it, if you're following the recipe, there's a simple video online. I mean, you just search Chris Trump FPJ. You have to almost intentionally deviate. Like, I'm gonna come up with something of my own plan, or I want papayas from my grocery store instead of getting something wild that has its own yeast and bacteria on it that will ferment itself. That's one of the big things people do. They get this fruit that's been bleach washed and is months old or whatever, weeks old, and they try and ferment it without adding any inoculum. And really, the only inoculum that you have is what the store clerk had on his hands when he touched it. You know, it's nasty. And they get all these weird blooms of green and funky stuff, and they're like, why did this turn out like that? I'm like, you're in Washington and you use papayas. Did you maybe get that at the store? And, you know, really use ice plant or mugwort or blackberry, like so why do we use kelp? Does anybody know? Mineral content, what else? Hormones. It is one of the fastest growing plants in nature. It is one of the most vibrant plants in nature. And we benefit from that being applied to our crops. We benefit from those biochemicals. And where else can we find that? In the new growing tips and the baby fruit of almost anything. The plant takes all this energy, all this photosynthesis, all this symbiotic relationship with its soil microbes, and it pushes it into that new growth area. So we're harvesting this new growth area, and we have beneficial biochemicals and plant growth hormones, and we have high density of nutrients. So we're basically getting the concept of kelp from your weeds, your local weeds, and it works. The plants respond incredibly well to it, and we don't know every actual specific plant growth hormone in every new tip of every plant. We don't have to understand that to benefit from the beauty of the painting, right? Yeah.
So is it more the elements that we're trying to get out of it rather than say growing a bunch of microbes in the ferment? Like it's
Yeah, so FPJ is more in the food category. There are yeast and bacteria that help that fermentation, but we're not actually using that for its microbial life. If you put that in concentrate in the OHN and the VRV because it's convenient for you, all the microbes are going to be dead, and that's okay. Because it really is think of it like a liquid compost, like a wonderful liquid compost. It's really high plant food. Our microbes are coming in the IMO process. Our microbes are established in the soil. You can do liquid IMO, video on that, and how it's like a actively aerated compost tea. You can do that if you want some foliar, because plants benefit from foliar microbial life. Their leaves in nature are covered with fungi and bacteria and yeast that have a relationship. They might even be harvesting nitrogen out of the air and feeding it through the cell wall. We're not totally sure, of how that all works, but it happens in nature, and so putting it on foliarly can be helpful. But the microbes in natural farming come through the IMO process, not necessarily through the FPJ, though there are beneficial microbes in the FPJ.
I was just gonna ask if you could talk on labs, it's not on there, and everyone thinks Canada, and they're like, oh yeah, labs.
Yeah, it's kind of like the easiest thing, so it became the most popular thing, but it's not the best part of it. Lactic acid bacteria is probably the rock star, one of the rock stars of the microbial world as far as our understanding. It makes up 70% of our human, microbial life. It probably really does have a huge role as far as percentage in nature. But really, if we're going to create a soil food web in our grow area, we can't just live with LAB. Lactic acid bacteria isn't all we need. So it's crazy helpful. It can condition soil. It can operate in anaerobic or aerobic conditions. It can clean up if you have kind of an over fertilizing and you need something to kind of deal with some of that. It can play a role. And so LAB can come in any of this. A little bit of LAB can come in, but and you can add it into IMO. But it really is in natural farming. It's part of it, but really like a low part. It's not the main thing. It's pretty easy to get tons of lactic acid bacteria if you're making IMO. It's dense with lactic acid bacteria. So it's great, it's helpful. It can condition your water and keep things fresh. It can help prevent disease or help some diseases. It can even knock them out, but you still have the cause of the disease, which is probably a lack of diversity. But yeah, LAB is pretty rad. It's just not quite in the online kind of community. It has like the top place in natural farming, but in natural farming, it's just a part of it, like an OHN or an FPJ. It's just kind of a component, where IMO or diverse microbial mix is really the rock star.
Is there any danger to viral loads, especially, particularly for things like FPJ? You want to be careful about,
Viral?
making sure of like mosaic virus and other things, or is that something that gets kind of pretty well solved with microbes?
Yeah, so a liquid IMO will knock out like a diverse compost tea. You don't have mosaic virus. If that's on your plant's leaves and you have diversity in your soil, the mosaic virus, stuff like that, these diseases, most of them are opportunistic in a void. So like we have root-borne fungal disease was killing a lot of trees, and as soon as we rebalanced the soil microbial life, we had refoliation within a year. We were back in production by year 3. The disease didn't go away. We didn't get rid of it. The microbe is still there. Our tree just chose the better rent payer when I gave it the opportunity. So it created that parasite said, "Tree, I have some candy for you," and they're like, "Oh, I don't have any other options. I'll choose you." But when the tree has this guy that's like, "Hey, let's do 50-50," it chooses the 50-50 rather than the predator. And that's the same thing we find if you spray the leaves with microbial life, like an IMO. Mosaic, for example, there's a ginger farmer in our town. We had this drastic rain event where it was just raining ridiculous. Everybody's ginger in Kohala was getting bacterial wilt. Everybody's ginger was dying. It was like spreading from the lowest or the most water dense place because the soil became extremely anaerobic, and so all the big guys weren't functioning, all the healthy diversity wasn't functioning. It was only the guys that could exist in that water saturated anaerobic environment. And so they were dying. And I gave all the materials to make IMO. I was like, aerate this, spray it in the morning or in the afternoon, the afternoon just because you don't want full sun on a fresh spray all day. You want to give it time to establish. And they sprayed it, all their bacterial wilt stopped spreading, and they had a great harvest. It stopped it right away. We had another farmer, same time, Hip Agriculture, just down the street. Same problem, exact same scenario. I gave them the same stuff. They didn't know what it was or didn't have time to do it. They didn't spray it. They lost their entire ginger harvest. And I was like, why didn't you guys? Anyways, it didn't, I guess, matter to them. But you can deal with a lot of disease with diversity. And so I'm never concerned, but that's also not current scientific thought. For example, we have Ohia quick decline in Hawaii. It's basically a root-borne fungal disease that gets in the cambium layer, and kills trees pretty quickly. It's basically the same thing like a macadamia quickvine like we have. It's similar. I don't know the exact genus of that thing, but I was talking to the Lisa Keith, the federal plant pathologist, and I was like, how about we create an inoculum from a healthy ophea forest and spray it? And I'm pretty sure, based on the results I have in my farm, that though we don't know the whole community we're spraying, we're going to have an outcome competition and we'll have a stop of disease. And she said, yeah, that sounds reasonable, but we can't do that, because we would have to verify every single microbe that we're applying and verify that the disease is not something we're applying, because we can't be applying the disease to the diseased trees. And I was like, yeah, I get what you're saying, but the diseased trees already have disease, and what they need is the diversity of the community. But that doesn't work in our current scientific model. We need, where we have an isolation. We have to isolate things, and that will have to change for us to understand the interconnectivity of microbial communities in nature. We don't understand that. I mean, am I wrong? We don't understand how microbes interconnect and work with each other in nature.
We working on it, but.
Yeah, it's
When you figure that in a healthy soil, you have 75,000 species of bacteria per teaspoon.
right.
Yes.
And that's just the bacteria. And so we can say in humility that I don't understand how all this works together. That's basically what I'm declaring. That's okay. I don't have to shy away from that lack of understanding. I can embrace it and say, so because I don't understand, let's change as little as possible about how nature's doing it and just transfer it to the farm. Because I don't understand, I don't want to change your gut biome before I put it in this other person. I want it just as it is, because that will cause health. Why? I have some theories, right? We all have theories, but we can actually say, it's okay, I don't understand all of that. But we don't want to say, I made this slurry of stuff I threw together, it's biology, so it'll work. You know, we have to, there's still a conscientious care for what we're doing. We have to kind of have a basic understanding that we are multiplying diversity. Otherwise you will get disease, not because you're spreading a disease, but because your plant becomes weak. All right, one more example, and then I'll do, I'm probably out of time. Okay. All right, quick thing. We got funding by County of Hawaii R&D because I did a trial and all of the extension agents for livestock came and saw it and were like, what the heck? There's a plant called a fireweed in Hawaii, and it kills cattle. They eat it and they die because they don't have the enzyme necessary to process it. Goats can eat it, no problem. So a friend of ours had 2 acres. It's his hobby to run 2 cattle on it. He was in my dad's wedding. He's kind of like an uncle. And he's like, all my cows are dying. So his cow was down, because of eating this thing. And it was, what they do is they stop eating. They have like kind of digestional failure and they die. And so we went over with LAB, a big animal syringe, and forced it in its mouth. It was up the next day. It ate in that same pasture, went to market, and he got paid for it. So it was super cool. But he still had this problem with really low grass production, really high fireweed production. Well, we were still 50% conventional on our farm at that time. We had a split operation now. 360 acres were organic, and the rest was 400 something was conventional. And so I had observed that in my Roundup strips on the conventional side, the first thing to pop up is fireweed. Why? Well, because I've killed all the fungal and yeast, and I've killed all microbial life. The first thing to come back is bacteria. So my fireweed in those strips are bacterial-loving plants. They love bacterial imbalance. So I'm looking at his pasture, and I'm like, and he got this quote. Basically, he called us because he got this quote to, these guys were gonna disc it 3 times, reseed it 18 inches deep, and he's like, you know, what do you think about the quote? It was really an expensive quote just to do that. And I'm like, that's not gonna solve your problem. Your problem is a imbalance of fungal bacterial ratio, probably just from years of grazing and misuse. And so I said, how about this? Dad, can I use some of our equipment? Because even though I'm managing the company, it's Dad's company, and I don't have permission to just take a tractor on a side project. So I had to rent equipment that was ours for the project. And my friend. Anyway, so I made a couple tons of fungal dominant IMO. And we did a light spading just to get in, and we inoculated, we did a mulch on 2 acres, and I sprayed with a liquid IMO. I did a light seeding of some indigenous grass mulch, basically. And, but we didn't pull any fireweed, it was all still sitting there. It was basically what you saw as you looked across the pasture. The extension agent saw this too. And then I just watched, and over the period of 3 months, I watched all the fireweed it got powdery mildew. It got right at the feeder zone where the roots end and the stem begins. It got destroyed by aphids. By the end of 3 months, every single fireweed plant was dead. Completely. It is 5 years later, 6 years later, and he's never had another fireweed. Now, what really got the extension agents, because they've spent $1 million of research trying to deal with fireweed for cattle, because cattle is one of the biggest industries in our state, is that the neighboring pasture was still completely dense with fireweed. So they came over to this project, and here is beautiful grass that he had to bring in now 4 cattle instead of 2 to deal with, because he was so high in grass production. And right on the other side of a non-barrier, just an electric wire fence, 3 wires, was solid fireweed. And so they're just sitting there, they're like, so what did you do? And so they threw some money at it. They wanted us to duplicate the project. And they're working on that right now. A student of mine is running the project because I moved out of Hawaii. And it's going all right. There's difficulties with any project. They had to move sites after they set up a fence and barrier. But the point is, I have the labs on that. I have the labs of before the microbial, the bacterial to fungal ratios, and after application. And there was a microbial life change. That's all we changed, and yet my grass is now thriving when before it could barely make it. We didn't change the nutrients and never fertilized. Like, it's just simply the mix. So when you're looking at your crop, and you're like, I need to just throw more nutrients at it, maybe not. Maybe you just need some decent soil and the microbes to mine the soil and make it plant available in relationship. Yeah, but I think I'm about out of time. Yeah, so I'm going to be around all day, so if you want to ask questions, feel free, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you.
Yeah, I'm just going to reiterate that this is a tool. It's a tool belt thing, and like for me myself personally, like not that you should copy me, but I'm a student of Elaine's. I'm taking her courses. I'm a student of Chris's. Like full on, you know. And I'm learning, and like there's a little bit of debate between some of the details, but it's okay and it's healthy, and we're learning. And yeah, so I just want to like encourage you guys, go to his YouTube channel. A lot of that stuff and those acronyms are confusing at first if you haven't heard them, but it's all explained, like what is OHN, get into the details. And the thing that after I took the course that I really realized on the forums that people are messing up is they're not following the details. They're making banana FPJs in Colorado, you know, or whatever. They're harvesting IMO out of their backyard in downtown Vancouver, like, you know, so, yeah.
Josh, I have 5 bottles of...
I was going to say, if any of you here are Korean natural farmers and you're just kind of on the verge of getting serious, Chris has OHN, and if you are and you know about that, that'll be a highly valuable commodity because it takes a year to make, and it's best after 3 years. So, yeah, thanks for bringing that, Chris. And we're just going to take a 15-minute break, and then up next are Dragonfly Earth Medicine.